the tax law expires from President Trump's Tax Act in late 2017. Some upcoming events beyond that is February 6th. We've got Doug Wilson and the co-presenter, fresh from the Urban Land Institute fall meeting on the state of the real estate economy in San Diego, Southern California, and beyond. March 5th, we have what the estate planners could learn from the estate administrators and litigators. A hugely popular one because it's kind of where the planning world meets the real world. April 2nd, we've putting together a panel of speakers on how to have conversations with your clients on philanthropy and charitable giving. With that, one quick announcement. Sorry to pass on some news in case those of you who haven't heard it, but Ellen Whalen, formerly with DLA Piper, ultimately moved to Duane Morris, but she passed away in the last 6 weeks. She was a great supporter of the council, a top-notch estate planner, ACTEC fellow. We miss her dearly. But with that, I want to bring up John Pagliuso and of U.S. Bank. They're our sponsors for today's meeting, and he's going to give you an update on U.S. Bank and the results of the merger of Union Bank within. John.
Good morning. I'm just going to speak real quickly about what's been happening with U.S. Bank and Union Bank. You've probably heard a lot of advertising and seen pop-ups on your computer about U.S. Bank, and I have too. But I'm in the private wealth group, and specifically, I'm a real estate asset manager and came from the Union Bank side of the equation. And just to kind of give everybody an update on what's been happening in our world, the private wealth group anyway, the two groups have now formally merged. The org charts have come together, and it's quite a big group. And I'm excited because there's pretty good synergy, and the cultures of the two banks are very similar. The private wealth group has 3 offices in San Diego, UTC, and 2 downtown, and the platform's kind of concentrated in California anyway: San Diego, Orange County, LA, West LA, San Francisco, Walnut Creek, Sacramento. So pretty full coverage. And there's also, as part of that, there's an ultra high net worth group called the Ascent, which is clients with 75 million and over. And in our private wealth group at U.S. Bank, our clients generally, I guess the hurdle is 3 million of assets under management, kind of the size. And what I'm going to talk about today is specialty assets. And the reason, that Bill wanted to slot this in is because it kind of dovetails well with our other 2 speakers. In fact, these other 2 speakers here have been engaged by our group multiple occasions. Robert more frequently, recently anyway. So we'll talk about how we work together with them a little bit. Okay, you can go to the next page. So what we've done is we've structured the group. To be regional. U.S. Bank has 4 regions in the country. California is its own region. There's about 13.5 million households in California, and then the other western region, that blue area, has got about 13 million households. So that map is really just to depict the coverage for the specialty asset management group. And while I'm a real estate asset manager, my other, primary role really is to be a point person for new business development and client exploration within the entire specialty asset management group. And so what are specialty assets? Flip the page. So specialty assets are generally assets that can't be managed and traded with the click of a keyboard, things that require a lot of hands-on work and specialized skill sets. The food groups that we have, and within the platform, there are probably about 90 people in this group across the country, the biggest two being real estate and farm, ranch, and timber. So the food groups are real estate, farm, ranch, and timber, natural resource management, which is more commonly known as mineral, oil, and gas rights. We do not have at this point in time intellectual property management. We manage loans and liabilities. And then real importantly, we have a closely held asset management group, and the closely held group does things like, there will be a board member, chairman of the board, a managing member, but their role really is to step in and act as owner for clients, whether in trust or just in an agency capacity, where they have fractional ownership interests in businesses. And then that dovetails quite a bit with farm, ranch, and timber, and more so with real estate, where you might have a trust and there's a corporation that owns real estate. And so, we kind of have both groups working together. But all right. And I'm kind of go through this very fast so that you can have a couple of minutes for questions at the end. So next slide. Okay, that's fine. So I think I just pretty much went over that. The key thing is down here on the bottom. Whoa. I'm going to move this so I can see the. Okay. The key thing here is that, we asset manage real estate and these other asset classes in trust accounts where we are trustee, co-trustee, have full or partial authority, but we also do all the same work in agency capacity. And I wanted to really explain the difference and what that is for those of you that may not know. The agency relationship is one where we can step in and help clients before they die, whether because they have complexity or they want to step away a little bit, or they're losing physical or mental capacity and they just need help. So we can step in and really provide all these services and do all the heavy lifting. I'll show you another slide about that in a minute. Okay, next. So the wealth approach, many of you have seen this. I think it's nothing new, but what U.S. Bank's group has been set up to do is basically to provide these different levels of service. There's the client, we're the wealth advisor, and we work hand in hand, and there's a subsequent slide that explains this a little better, with all of the advisors. So we don't take the advisor's role, the CPA, the estate planning attorney. We don't take away from them. We use them, they use us, and it's an iterative process in working with the client. Down below, specialty asset management on the left, that's the group I'm in that I just described, has all the different specialties, real estate, farm, ranch, and timber, closely held, et cetera. Wealth planning, I think most of you know what that is. We have sizable group of wealth planners. In fact, the way we've set it up is in California. I'm just going to speak about California. Kathleen Medina, who's here in San Diego, Legacy Union Bank, wasn't able to attend. She heads up a group of 6, what we call wealth trust advisors. Wealth trust advisors are generally, they're all attorneys, former practicing trust officers, and they're on the front end of evaluating new client opportunities and part of the planning process. Within that group, there are all of our planners, of which there are about a dozen. The same thing again, usually CPAs and LLMs. And while we don't do people's taxes and give tax advice, we evaluate their wealth plan, their estate plan, and work with their current tax advisors and legal advisors to provide opinions and directions. Investment management, those are portfolio managers. Trust and estate services, those are our trust officers. We're fortunate to have two very, very senior trust officers here in San Diego. And then there's the bankers, private banking side, which we call private wealth advisors. Okay, next. So how does it work? This is the trust. So I like this diagram because it basically says, we're down at the bottom. We're kind of the chief operating officer. We still have all of the clients' trusted advisors, their attorneys, CPAs, their business partners, their co-owners. And it's hard to get people that have had their arms wrapped around all of their stuff for most of their lives to let go, or to realize maybe there's things that they don't know. They don't know what they don't know. So they have options in the agency relationship. And I kind of put these names on: chairman of the board, chief executive officer, president, really just to describe their level of involvement, right? So they can have as much or as little of involvement in decision-making as they want in this type of relationship. And the important thing is it will change over time, and there's flexibility. Okay, next. Okay, so now real estate. So that's just big picture. Real estate, asset management is, specifically what I do. And, we've got 11 offices across the country. In California, there's me and my assistant Jasmine Johannesson, who's here somewhere. And then in Los Angeles, we have 3 asset managers and 1 assistant. And then in Seattle, we've got another 3 asset managers. But essentially, we try to stick close to where the clients are, so we can interface with them directly. But we work on real properties all over the country, and we kind of divide and conquer and assign individual asset managers depending on the need of the client, complexity, or asset, class or skill or complexity. So 19 real estate asset managers. We've got about 1,400 properties currently under management, 2 billion market cap. That's just kind of current numbers. Most of it is trust real estate. A smaller amount of it is agency. Okay, flip the page. Pretty pictures. These are, just to depict that we can really pretty much handle all asset classes. Okay, next. What's the value? So what do we do? All these things: introduce strategies to help increase income and property values, take care of the work tied to owning direct real estate, represent owners' best interest as a fiduciary, facilitate sales, purchases, exchanges, which will be talked about in greater detail in a minute. And the important thing really is the last bullet point, is that oftentimes real estate is a very, very significant portion of client wealth. And what we bring to the table, I think, is really exciting, in that it's the ability to integrate all of their other assets and financial planning with maybe their business and or real estate holdings, but essentially to bring it all together so that nothing's kind of hanging out in a vacuum separately when it comes to the planning and, more importantly, management side of it. Okay, next. We're going to flip. You guys can read that later. So the important thing, clients say, well, why do I need an asset manager? I have a property manager, right? why do I need an asset manager? Well, not to dismiss the importance of property managers because they serve a very important role, but primarily their role is to collect rents, pay bills, do minor repairs and maintenance. They're not looking at how does this asset fit in the client's portfolio, how does it fit in their estate plan, all those types of things. They're not looking at the capital stack to see if now is the time to refinance or to sell an asset. They're not thinking about holding reserves for future capital expenses, just all those things that they're not doing and thinking about as an owner would. So essentially that's, the big difference between asset management and property management. So I created this diagram to, kind of have as an exhibit to go through that discussion with people to get them to understand the difference and the value in asset management. Okay, next. And so we have a few levels of service, and the fee is different for all of it. But most assets are fully managed, but we do have some limited duty and hold title only. And I'm not going to go through those in any detail. Okay, so that's it. So speed dating.
Thanks so much, John. John, thanks so very much. It was a great presentation. Of course, I've known you for a number of years in your U.S. Bank or Union Bank role, and obviously you're one of the big cheeses in all of U.S. banks. So what a great honor! And it's nice to hear about the bank as a resource for taking care of the real estate assets. So thank you so much. I want to bring up our next speaker, and thanks to Sandra Connor of Aspirient on introducing me to Greg Anglia. He'll correct me in a second. And Verinda Missette of Interfaith Community Services. They're our nonprofit spotlight for today.
Oh, I just took the entire thing off its stand. That's pretty cool. Hey, everyone. Thank you for having us here. My name is Greg Angel. I've done a lot of speeches. I've never done a speech holding this thing, so that's kind of a first. Really so excited to be with you all this morning. I have dedicated my life to making this world a better place. And I've done that in a lot of ways in a number of different organizations over a 20-year career. And over the last decade, I've had the opportunity to lead a group called Interfaith Community Services, which many of you are familiar with because we're based right here in North San Diego County. And I have come to believe that the best way to improve this world and to make this community a better place is one person and one family at a time. So I want to share just briefly with you today about the work that Interfaith does and the opportunity for people who you work with, for you through that work, to make transformational impacts in the lives of our neighbors in times of need. Okay, next slide. We're going to buzz through this quickly. Interfaith empowers people in need. We provided a support to more than 20,000 people, all locally. We're just here in San Diego County. Interfaith, we bring together a diversity of faith communities. We're not a faith-based organization, but a lot of people of faith and a lot of people helping others with empowering services. Next slide, please. So who do we help? Scott is a U.S. Air Force veteran. And a lot of the work that we do is around homelessness. And when you think about homelessness, what do you think about? Somebody. Drugs. Maybe you think about somebody who's like crazy on the streets or something, right? That could have been Scott. Scott was homeless. He was struggling with substance abuse. He also had some mental health issues. He ended up in the psychiatric ward at the VA hospital. And rather than the VA discharge him to the streets, which happens often, Interfaith operates a recuperative care center for veterans and civilians who are being discharged out of hospitals and are homeless. And so Scott came into our program, and when he first came in, he wasn't ready, and it wasn't a good fit for him. He went back to being homeless, but his life continued to be crappy. He ended up back in the hospital. He came back into our program. At that point, he was ready, and he got sober. he got employment. And in July of this year, he moved out into an apartment home of his own. He could totally be that person on the streets, that stereotypical person you think about when you think about homelessness locally, but he's independent, he's self-reliant, he's a veteran who served our country. Next slide, please. So we have a big problem with homelessness in San Diego. It is not unique to San Diego, but it is unique to cities and communities like ours who have high cost of housing and very tight rental markets. Compounded in San Diego, we have higher than usual inflation. We were just identified as the most expensive city in the entire country. And we have a higher energy cost. We're the only city in California that actually gained individuals. More people moved into San Diego in 2022 than left. No other city in California has that claim. Next slide. Rents have gone up. So all of this means that when people have problems, they're more likely to experience homelessness here in San Diego than they are in other communities. Next slide, please. So here's somebody who's from San Diego, and he shares that he's gainfully employed, earns about $60,000 a year. After paying all of his bills, he can save about $2,000 a month. Not bad. He doesn't pay for housing because he lives in the van. He's turned his van into a studio apartment, and he's leaving. He's moving to Idaho. He can't afford it here, and he's heading out because it's just not a place that he can afford. This guy's doing pretty well. He's very responsible. He's identified that the way for him to make ends meet is to turn his van into a studio apartment. So it's just an illustration of the challenges people face here locally. Homelessness does often involve people who are mentally ill, who have addiction, but a lot of times it doesn't. A lot of times it's people like Barron who are gainfully employed and who just can't afford the cost of rent and housing here. Next slide, please. So community-wide, a lot more data than you'll have time to look at here, but I'll point out one figure: 41,345. Anyone want to guess what that number is? This is the amount of people who are homeless in San Diego County and actually tried to end their homelessness by accessing a program like what we do at Interfaith and other organizations helping people overcome homelessness. 40,000 people locally. That's 15%, or that's 1.5% of the population experiencing homelessness, trying to end their homelessness, not just sitting on their butts, trying to do something about it. 40,000 people. Next slide, please. So Interfaith just opened a place for families who have children who have fallen into homelessness. One of the families that we worked with is Rebecca. She works at a local school district. She has $15,000 in the bank. Good credit score. Lost her home, couldn't get approved for a new apartment. Was living in her car with her kid, could not get approved for an apartment. Homelessness is not just about individuals' challenges. It's about a really tight rental market. And when that apartment opens up and there's 15 applicants, Rebecca's not getting chosen, not getting chosen. Words aren't working for me. You get the point, right? So what Interfaith did is Interfaith helped Rebecca stabilize. Our new shelter wasn't yet open, so we actually put her into a different location, worked with the landlord and got her an apartment. She's fine. She's doing good. She's working. Her kids are good. Next slide, please. The services Interfaith provides are what we call low barrier. We meet people where they're at, whether it's Scott and his substance use issues, Rebecca just needing to find a landlord who will say yes, families who have multi-generational family members who wouldn't be accepted at traditional shelters. All of those are families who we're working with at Interfaith Community Services. Next slide, please. So this last year through Interfaith, we helped more than almost 1,500 people overcome homelessness. When you think about why homelessness isn't as bad in North County as it is in other parts of our county, Interfaith Community Services is a major reason why. More than 1,500 people would have become homeless if it wasn't for Interfaith. Because not only did Interfaith end homelessness for almost 1,500, Interfaith also prevented another almost 1,700 people from falling into homelessness. We have specific programs for veterans, specific programs for at-risk youth who are working towards high school graduation and are experiencing homelessness or having other challenges. 100% of those high school students graduate, go on to college. And as I mentioned, we just opened one of the only, in fact, the only low barrier family shelter for families experiencing homelessness in North County. You may have heard a couple weeks ago that Interfaith was selected by a team of national experts to be awarded a $5 million grant by Jeff Bezos, the Bezos One Day Families Fund. He set up a $2 billion fund to address family homelessness. You cannot apply for it. He has national experts who select groups and invite them to apply. Interfaith laid out a plan to help about 2,500 families over 5 years, and they awarded us the full amount. It's an amazing gift, right? So we don't need your help, right? We're good. No. There's so many families out there. So we're launching a campaign to end family homelessness, and to do that one family at a time. To do that for Rebecca, to do that for others, one family at a time. And we need support. And so that's where your work and your impact will make a huge difference. We have had individuals set up through their estates gifts that created the only detox and recovery center in North County for people overcoming substance use without the ability to pay. We have individuals who have set up endowed funds specifically for families that we continue to administer. We have individuals who have set up gifts to be held in perpetuity at local community foundations, at other funds. All of these opportunities help change and save lives. So we're really excited to be able to share that with you today. The reality is that the people you work with have the opportunity through their estates, through their legacies, to create a gift that will help Rebecca, that will help Scots in the future when they turn to Interfaith in their time of need. My colleague and partner, Verinda Missett, is here. She's our Chief Development Officer. She's one of our partners leading Interfaith Community Services. She's going to be here. If you have a client, anyone you're interested, want to learn more about our programs. I apologize. There's a big regional task force on homelessness conference down in San Diego I have to go speak at, but would love the opportunity to connect with you and share more. All of these problems seem intractable, but they're absolutely solvable. One person, one family at a time, we can improve this community. Appreciate your time. Bill, appreciate the opportunity to share.
Thank you so much. Greg, thank you so very much. Fascinating work that you're doing, and it sounds like you're really making an impact. Pete, do you want to say a few words just about the trifectas quickly?
I promise it'll be quick. Welcome everybody, especially those that are back in person that we haven't seen in a while, and especially those that are new first timers here. What we do is we want to enhance your experience with the council meetings, and to do that a step further, we created the trifecta. So the goal is somewhere, put your business card in there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pair you up with 2 other people, hopefully that'll complement your industry, get to know each other on a personal basis, talk some business over coffee, breakfast, lunch, a hike, happy hour, whatever that is. So if you're interested in the trifecta, put your business card in there. I'll create those later this afternoon. So if you have any special requests, just give me a call. Thank you, Bill.
Pete, thank you so very much. The trifectas are really just quite fantastic. So certainly take advantage, especially you Zoomers. Let me know if you want to be a part of it, and I'll pass your name on to Pete. It's a great way to develop a relationship, and that's the key behind the work we do. Certainly want to recognize David Jacobs and Libby, where did she go? For dealing with check-in. There she is. Thank you for all the work that you do in organizing the meetings and check-in and name tags and everything else. Without any further ado, I want to introduce you to our speakers. Robert Valera of Voight Real Estate, as you all know him from being on a planning team for the Planning for Real Estate Family series that we have. He's a multifamily expert and has dealt with 1031s many times in his careers, and he's going to certainly share some practical issues behind fitting into the technical rules of Section 1031 of the Internal Revenue Code. Bill Exeter is one of the national experts in 1031. I mean, he's I think he's been around since the beginning of 1031s, if not even before, before being the big Starker case, and before it was codified into section 1031. So he's going to give you all the technical requirements and things to think about in that regard. Robert, Bill, whoever.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, I'm just real briefly going to touch on why people pursue 1031 tax deferred exchanges, and then I'll pass the baton to Bill, and he'll provide us with a lot of the details as to how to go about it to remain in compliance with the Internal Revenue Code. And then I'll come back up and do the case studies. If we can go ahead and kick to the next slide. Brandon, thank you. So the 1031 exchange allows you to effectively sell one property and acquire another property, reallocate your capital while deferring the capital gains tax. And I've listed in the frequency that of occurrence that we're currently seeing in the marketplace. Traditionally it's been done to re-leverage. So for example, a small investor who might start with a fourplex could exchange up into 8 units, in another market cycle, exchange up into 16 units and begin to pyramid their wealth upwards. Now we're beginning to see a lot of people who want to reallocate capital out of California. Ouch. I'm a native here. I don't like seeing this, but it's occurring. And, I was looking at, okay, why is this occurring? And I came up with the conclusion that deteriorating governance is the real reason. Increasing regulation, but it's not just the regulation. We're seeing people move, interestingly, capital into San Diego, coming out of the Bay Area or Los Angeles, because they consider us to be better governed and a better opportunity than those markets. So I'm pleased to see that. But we're also seeing capital moving out of state. We also see people reallocate into a different property sector. A lot of times owners who own apartments, which can be management intensive, they operate them through their younger years and their middle age. And as they get older, they want to go into a triple net property, frequently referred to as a coupon clipper, where you can just collect the rents. We also see, conversely, people with multi-tenant commercial properties, which have a greater management component. You're more frequently dealing with vacancies, and they want to get into apartments where they can then plug in professional property management. And once again, lowers their risk profile, smooths out the cash flow. San Diego County, interestingly, and city of San Diego popped up on a list about 5 years ago as the city with the most rapidly aging housing stock in the country. Who would have thought that? I mean, San Diego, we're not an old city like a lot of the cities east of the Mississippi River, but a tremendous proportion of our apartments were built in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. And what that study looked at was the percentage of the housing stock that was hitting, I think it was 40 years old, a time when, you frequently have to go in and begin making major capital replacements. So we are seeing some people who do exchanges. They're either going into a more modern design and functionality if they have commercial properties, or they're doing an exchange into a newer property to avoid major capital replacements and renovations. So that's the why. Now let's get into the how. Bill, you want to come on up? Help me welcome Bill Exeter.
Thank you for fixing the microphone, by the way. Makes it a lot easier now. Well, good morning, everybody. I always nickname our presentations Unraveling the Mystery of 1031 Exchanges. We get a lot of folks who call us and say, I talked to 3 or 4 people. I got 3 or 4 different answers. And I'm a little confused as to what really, really matters. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The code, the regs, and the rulings answer some questions, but they create a lot of questions. There's a lot of gray area, et cetera. So one of my goals today is to kind of focus on the most important parts of the 1031 exchange, the structure, the compliance issues, and really point out why there's confusion, what's really important, the aggressive position, the conservative position, and then really hopefully helping the investor make the best decision for them that they could possibly do. So I'm going to fly through the first couple of slides pretty quickly. Next slide, please. So Exeter 1030, for those of you who have not worked with us before, we're a qualified intermediary accommodator. We cover all 50 states. We cover all the U.S. territories. We're also one of the few that will handle foreign property 1031 exchanges. So contrary to what you'll see on the internet or brochures where it says you cannot do a 1031 exchange of foreign property, what they really mean is you can't sell U.S. property and buy foreign property, and you can't sell foreign property and exchange it to U.S. property. But you can sell foreign property in 1031 exchange into other foreign property if that triggers a U.S. tax consequence. That certainly is possible. We handle all types of exchanges, so forward, reverse, improvement. We're not going to cover the details there too much today. Next slide, please. And we're one of the few qualified intermediaries as government oversight. I'm going to talk about that and why that's critical. Next slide, please. And Exeter Trust, I'm going to talk about this in a minute too, but we're one of the few qualified intermediaries that has any type of regulatory oversight. And that's critical, and I'll point that out in a minute. Next slide. So 1031 exchange benefits, it's all about deferring the taxes. A lot of investors call it tax-free, but it's actually tax deferred. Most people are going to sell and exchange over and over and over. We have a morbid sense of humor. We call it swap until you drop. Keep exchanging until you pass on. You got to step up in cost basis. And that's when your capital gain and depreciation recapture taxes go away. So that's really the issue, is keeping the equity in their pocket so they can buy more assets, larger assets, more doors, increase the cash flow, and bottom line, increase the net worth. Next slide. 1031 exchange structures, I'm going to quickly fly through this. Forward exchanges are actually 97% of our transaction volume. That's where the investor is selling first, and then they buy or reinvest in replacement property second. So that's most of what people do. Reverse exchanges allow the investor to go out, take all the time they want, find the new property, negotiate, go under contract, open escrow, and actually close on the purchase before they sell their current property. They're a lot more complicated. There's more costs involved. Traditional lenders or conduit lenders typically don't want to work with those. So that's why that's only 3% of our transaction volume. Improvement 1031 exchanges are a situation where the client sells an asset, uses the proceeds to buy the replacement property, has cash left over, and wants to make improvements on the property they acquired. Both the reverse and the improvement exchange require us as the qualified intermediary to acquire and hold, or what the IRS calls park legal title to the replacement property. So that's why it gets a lot more complicated, and lenders, have a hard time working with those. Next slide, please. So getting started, of course, notify all the parties, because everything's drafted a little differently when you're doing a 1031 exchange. So it's critical that everybody knows that's what they're doing, especially escrow, so they can draft everything properly. The biggest issue, and we get calls every week where they say, I closed yesterday, I closed last week or last month. And they'll say things like, well, I told the escrow officer, don't disperse the funds, so I want to do a 1031 exchange. The issue is the purchase and sale agreement has to be assigned to the qualified intermediary. We step into their shoes as the seller. That's what defers the taxes. When the closing occurs without the 1031 exchange set up in advance, it triggers the taxable event. So whether they want to go back and try to fix it, they can. It's a taxable event at that point. Next slide, please. One of the things I want to point out, and a lot of people aren't aware of, is this industry has no licensing or regulatory body. There's no regulatory oversight. So it's kind of the wild, wild west. There's a few of us who are regulated because we chose to be regulated. We went down a different path. So some of them are owned by banks. In our case, we have a trust company on board. So we're licensed, regulated, and audited by the Division of Banking. So that's critical. I've been doing this for 40 years, not quite the beginning of time, but close. And all the QIs that I have seen fail, most of them would have prevented had there been regulatory oversight. So that's really critical to protect the clients. You, of course, want to check for bonding and insurance. The third one is qualified trust accounts. For those of you who've done real estate for quite a while, you probably know about the Land America debacle. And quickly, they failed because of the Land America 1031 exchange company. They invested their funds in auction rate securities, and that froze in February 2009. So they couldn't get the funds out of the investment. Not necessarily a bad investment, just not prudent for escrow or 1031 exchange funds. So long story short, it forced him into involuntary bankruptcy, and the judge ruled the funds are corporate funds, not client funds, because they're held in the corporate name. He also ruled his ruling would have been different had they used a qualified trust or a qualified escrow account. So it's critical to make sure the funds are held in a qualified trust or qualified escrow account. Next slide, please. Let's see. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide too. So this is probably the most important concept in the 1031 exchange world. It's also where we have the most confusion out there. We get calls all the time where folks will say, I've been told that I don't qualify for a 1031 exchange because I didn't hold the property for at least a year and a day, 18 months, 24 months. And the question is, well, what really matters? Well, the code, the regulations and rulings have no holding period required. So contrary to what you see out there, there is no holding period. But what it does say is you have to have the intent to hold for investment or rental or business use purposes. So the longer you hold it for rental or investment, the easier it is to prove intent. But that's not the requirement. The requirement is if you get audited, basically, you're going to have to prove you intended to hold it for investment. So quick story. We had one of our clients do an exchange, bought a condo on Coronado Island, didn't read the CC&Rs until after the close of escrow. That's always a big mistake. Quickly found out within a few days after close, it had to be owner occupied. Immediately sold, did an exchange, and bought another property. He was audited by the Franchise Tax Board. They allowed his 1031 exchange to qualify, even though he held it for about a month and a half, because he could prove his intent was to hold for investment purposes. Probably through all the panicked emails back and forth, but so the most important thing here is intent. So quickly, those investors who are in the business to buy and do something to the property, builders, developers, contractors, rehabbers, flippers, condo conversion specialists, they really intend to buy, do something, and then sell. So they're holding the property as inventory. So they're holding it for sale. They're not holding it for investment purposes. And that's critical. So it's all about your intent to hold for rental investment, not hold for sale. So when a person, let's say, inherits the property and the next month they go to sell it, did they as an individual have the intent to hold it for rental investment or business use? So we're always looking for that intent. What can we prove should they get audited? And that is a quick whirlwind tour on qualified use. Any questions on qualified use? That's the most important. Yes. Good question. His question was, he heard that you can do it with a personal residence. It's my favorite answer. It depends. But it is possible. Probably the best way to answer it is that we have a client, this is a number of years ago, but a client and his wife bought property in La Jolla, lived in it, owned it for 42 years as a primary residence, wanted to sell. They were having health problems, wanted to go back and live with their family. But his gain was about $8 million. So he said, we can't sell. I'm going to get killed on taxes. If he sold, he would have the $500,000 tax-free exclusion, but he paid tax on $7.5 million. In this case, you can combine the two. So what we recommended is move out of the house, move back with your family, convert it to rental property, rent it for 2 years. That's just our opinion. 2 years straddles 3 tax periods. Very solid proof that was the intent. Then at that point, sell the property, and you could still say you've lived in it for 2 out of the last 5 years. So you still get the $500,000 tax-free exclusion. But now you can also say you've rented the property. You've held it for investment for 3 tax periods, two years. And so now you qualify for a 1031 exchange. So they got $500,000 tax-free, $7.5 million tax deferred through the 1031 exchange program. So there are ways to go both directions, but it just takes some planning. Other questions on qualified use? Okay, next slide. Holding period we talked about, so next slide. Like-kind properties, a lot of misinformation out there as well. Like-kind is easy. Like-kind means you're selling real estate, you have to buy real estate. Simple as that. It does not mean condo for condo, apartments for apartments. It's real estate for real estate. So things you wouldn't even think of would qualify as like-kind property. Next slide. So this will be a quick list, but you notice it includes air rights, water rights, mineral rights, certain types of oil and gas investments. We've done exchanges on vineyards and timberland and cell site towers and billboards. So as long as it's considered to be real estate, it will qualify for 1031 exchange treatment. Next slide. Going back to your question, so anything that is just personal residence, personal use doesn't qualify, but intent and usage can change. So it's just a matter of changing what you're doing with the property. If it's personal use, stop personal use, rent it out. Personally, I would do 2 years, straddles 3 tax periods, really solid proof that was your intent. Shorter periods might work. It just depends on how aggressive you want to be. Next slide. Non-like-kind property. Can't remember if I put a slide at the very back in here, so I'm going to cover it here. With real estate owned by an entity, this is where it gets a little confusing, a little challenging. Probably the most common example is you have an investor or multiple investors. They use an LLC, they buy property in the LLC, maybe it's 5 investors, goes full cycle, they decide to sell, and they all come and say, we're going to go different directions. We want to do 1031 exchanges. They don't own real estate. They own partnership interest in a partnership, an LLC partnership. The LLC as an entity is selling the real property. The individual partners are getting cash distributions, which won't qualify for 1031 exchange treatment. There are probably hundreds of possible scenarios here to where we can reposition this. It may be some kind of a redemption agreement to get the partners out who don't want a 1031 exchange. Changing the underlying partners does not hurt. The entity is the same entity, same tax ID number, et cetera. So we have to look at the goals and objectives and see what all the individual members or partners want to do, and then see how we can get it structured so they are actually selling real estate. The intent to hold comes into play here. A lot of people will say, just do a drop and swap, deed the property out to individual names, hold it as individuals, and then within a couple of weeks or month, you're selling and doing a 1031 exchange. The question is, did the individual have the intent to hold the property for investment, or did they just take title to sell and do a 1031 exchange? There's case law both ways, case law that allowed it, case law that did not allow it. Some of those case laws were as a general partnership. Would the court rule the same with an LLC partnership as a general partnership? We think so, but don't know for sure. Some of those cases were under the old California Partnership Act. We think they'd rule the same, but again, don't know. So we try not to do drops and swaps by deeding out unless we absolutely have to. Okay, next slide, please. Deadlines, I'm going to cover this real quick. So when the closing occurs of the sale, you have 45 days to identify what you're going to acquire. That's the tough part, and especially in today's market. Surprised Robert hasn't lost more hair. That's why I have known. 45 days just drives you crazy. But it is what it is. You have 45 calendar days to identify what you're going to acquire, an additional 135 days after that to complete the exchange for a total of 180 days. Next slide. So the one thing to point out here is we're now at the end of the year. So the question is, what happens if a 1031 exchange fails? When is it taxable? And or when do they have the right to receive their funds? So Section 1031 works in conjunction with Section 453. 453 is the installment sale code. So let's say the sale occurs today, closes escrow today. The 45th day or deadline to identify property lands next tax year. They don't have the right to receive their proceeds until the 46th day. So even if they choose not to identify any property and the exchange fails, because they don't have the right to receive it until next tax year, it defers the gain into next year. Same for the 45 to the 180 days. If they identify property, but then decide not to acquire the property, they don't have the right to receive the proceeds until the 181st day, which lands next tax year. So even if the exchange is going to fail, if it's toward the end of the year, we can probably structure it so that it pushes the gain into the following year. Next slide, please. Identification requirements. just kind of briefly, most people use the 3-property rule. They're selling one asset. They're probably trading up in value and buying one asset. However, if you want to sell a larger asset and diversify, buy a lot of smaller assets, that's when we look at the 200% rule. The 200% limit is 200% of the sale price of whatever you sold. So let's say, as an example, we had a client who sold a $4 million asset here in California. I'm not sure why, but wanted to buy a whole bunch of single families in Tennessee. So he identified 56 single families, ended up buying about 20 some. So with that, it's more than 3 properties. So 200% would be $8 million. He could identify up to 8 million in value. It doesn't matter how many properties that is. So it's really either or. The 95% exception just says if you identify more than 3, more than 200%, as long as you actually acquire 95% of the value that you identify, you'll qualify. Next slide. Reinvestment requirements. We get a lot of clients who think all they have to reinvest is their cash, their equity, or all they have to reinvest is their taxable gain. So it's none of those. It's actually the top level. So let's say in that example, I just used $4 million sale price. You can subtract your routine selling expenses. Net sale price is probably 3.8 million. That would be the magic number. They have to reinvest at that level. So the government's really taken the position. You've got this asset worth a net of 3.8. As long as you remain fully invested at that level or greater, it's all tax deferred, but you can trade down in value. So if you sell for 3.8, you buy for 3 million, you've traded down by 800,000. Does not hurt the 1031 exchange, just means that 800,000 is taxable. You also have to reinvest all the equity. And a lot of people say you have to, I should probably back up. A lot of the stuff you read says you have to trade equal or up in value. You have to replace or reinvest all your equity, and you have to replace your debt. For the most part, that's true because most people want to defer all their taxes, but you can replace debt with cash. So if it's a $3.8 million net sale price, you could buy another property for 3.8, pay all cash, and have no debt, and it would still qualify. So contrary to what you see out there, you can replace debt that's paid off on the sale of your current property with cash on your replacement property. You also can trade down in value. So let's say it's 3.8, you trade down, you buy 3 million. Again, doesn't hurt the exchange, you just pay tax on 800,000. Some people do that to have less debt. Some people do that to pull cash out. It's the old real estate rich, cash poor kind of a thing. So all of that would qualify by doing a partial 1031 exchange. Next slide. Excuse me. Seller carryback notes. We're getting a lot of questions on this today. Interest rates are high. Sellers are trying to get deals done. They're looking for ways to help facilitate that. They agree to do a seller carryback note with the buyer. Great for the buyer, complicated for the seller's 1031 exchange. Remember, you have to reinvest all the net proceeds. Well, the net proceeds are cash plus the seller carryback note. So somehow you have to use that seller carryback note toward the purchase of your replacement property. There's probably 5 different options there. So if you have an issue like that, we can certainly walk through those, but very difficult to do a seller carryback note through a 1031 exchange. Next slide. Related party issues. If you read the code, it says related party issues are okay. If you sell to a related party, they have to hold the property for 2 years. If you buy from a related party, you have to hold that property for 2 years. What they often miss is a revenue ruling. Revenue ruling 2002-83. What it boils down to is selling to a related party is not a problem. It's a 2-year holding period, very easy. Buying from a related party in most cases will not work. They're trying to avoid basis swapping, kind of abusing the tax code. So in most cases, it won't work unless we can show that there's no tax avoidance going on. So if the related party does their own 1031 exchange, that would work. If we could show they're actually paying equal or greater taxes, that would also work. Next slide, please. Talked about partial exchanges. Next slide. Exchanging multiple properties, you can certainly do that. You can sell multiple, you can buy multiple. One of my favorite things to talk about when I'm talking to investors is if you're getting close or into retirement or even later in retirement, a lot of times the kids today, they don't want real estate. So sit down with the kids and find out what they do want. Maybe it's passive income. Maybe they just don't want to manage real estate, whatever it might be. Use the 1031 exchange to reposition into properties that they do want to inherit. So it's a great way to kind of exchange multiple assets, get into assets that the kids actually do want to deal with. Do it now before it's too late. Next slide. And this will be the last slide. I actually gave this example when we were talking about the combining of the two strategies. So there's a lot of ways to combine a 1031 exchange, a 121 exclusion, in different ways, different structures, depending on the scenario. So when people say you can't use a 1031 on a primary residence, a second home, a vacation property, it is possible. We just have to kind of sit down and look at it. We have to make sure we answer the question intent. How do we prove intent to hold for investment purposes? And that is a whirlwind tour on 1031 exchanges. Any questions I can answer for you? Yes. Yes. Sure, absolutely. And first, to back up a little bit, the before the Delaware Statutory Trust, it was the tenant in common, so the syndicated tenant in common investment properties. With those, you could have up to 35 investors. Fast forward, 2008 recession hit. Lenders had a lot of difficulties foreclosing on them. Trying to get 35 people to agree to do anything is like herding cats. So one way to look at it is ticks also stand for blood-sucking insects. You have to be careful with that. So the lenders really drove that car where they said, we're not going to lend to syndicated ticks anymore. We're going to lend to Delaware Statutory Trust. So DST is just a trust drafted under Delaware law. It's either going to own one large asset or a portfolio of large assets. Examples might be the ESPN headquarters, a lot of the Amazon distribution facilities, the Verizon data centers. And there's a lot of pretty significant assets out there that are in Delaware Statutory Trusts. The target market, if you will, are investors who want to get out of real estate, don't want to manage it, but don't want to get killed in taxes. So they can sell, they can do an exchange, they can buy into the Delaware Statutory Trust. So they're really buying a beneficial interest in the DST. And it's probably like a 0.25% interest or something. But it is tax deferred. You can exchange in, and then 4 to 7 years is the average holding period in the back, and you can exchange out and do whatever you want to do. Again, it's sale of real estate. Pros and cons, like anything. Number one, if you get into a DST, you lose total control. So if it's the investor wants control, the DST would not be for them. Most of the clients who do it want absolutely no control. They're just done with real estate. So they're happy to allow the trustee of the DST to actually manage that. DSTs have a limited liability, so that's always a positive too. Probably the 4 primary uses of a DST. One is the investor who wants out. So they just they're looking for DSTs, they identify DSTs, that's all they're going to go after. Second would be an investor who actually wants to go out and find real estate. But the question is, what if I can't find real estate? I don't want to pay the tax by accident. So the DST could be a backup ID property. Third would be somebody who sells, gets into an exchange, and then finds out they can't qualify for traditional financing. With the DSTs, in most of them, they're built-in financing. And you don't have to go through underwriting or qualify. If you buy a 0.25% interest, you get 0.25% of the debt. It's non-recourse to the investor. And fourth, in a lot of cases, you'll see someone actually go out, buy their own property, have cash left over. Historically, you'd have to pay tax on that. In this case, you can buy a sliver of the DST and defer the tax on that as well. So, good. Follow-up question? Nope. Okay. So there's pros and cons, just kind of depends on what's right for the investor. Did you really? His question was that we're headquartered in Wyoming. So the national headquarters is here in San Diego. That's where our 1031 exchange operations headquartered. When we started the trust company, we kind of looked at all 50 states, narrowed it down to Wyoming. Part of it was the regulators and the regulatory environment. They're really a partner. I mean, we could sit down and talk to them, and they don't walk around with a big club trying to beat you over the head. So that was a big part of it. Taxes, of course, a big part of that as well. And it turned out to be a profit center for us too. We thought it'd be more of a cost center just by putting it there, but Wyomingians want to do business with people in Wyoming. So it's been a good choice for us. Good question. Most of them will have a private placement memorandum. It'll detail what their business plan is, but probably 4 to 7 years. And then they'll sell and go full cycle. You can do a regular 1031 exchange at that point. In theory, you can get out earlier, but there's no guarantee, and you'd probably take a discount if you tried to get out early. So they really need to go into it and assume they're going to stay in there 4 to 7 years. And with that, I will turn it over to Robert, and then I'll be around afterwards along with Robert if we have any questions too.
And Bill joked about my hairline. I think I've been involved in about 250 tax deferred exchanges over the years as a real estate broker, of course, not as an exchange accommodator. What Bill doesn't know is in, I think, 1982, when I did my first tax deferred exchange, I was as tall as you, Bill. Okay. So, we're talking about real estate, but a successful exchange matches people and property. It's not just about the sticks and bricks. I find the flesh and blood is really more important. And so when we talk about key planning considerations, you notice I start out, assess the client's needs. You really need to understand their motivations and their capabilities. You need to understand the real estate itself well enough to understand what it's going to be like for the client to hold it and operate that property, and really in a dynamic manner, not just what does the Excel spreadsheet say, what's going to be like to have that property over a period of time. Because the financial projections that you've looked at, how many of those survive more than 12, 18, 24 months? Yeah, I can hear the chuckles. You get it. So you need to assess the client's needs, their experience level, their risk tolerance. And, that gets into stage of life cycle, things that financial planners are aware of, how much leverage is appropriate, what's their tolerance for vacancies. And this is particularly important with commercial properties. Now, if you own a 24-unit apartment building and 1 unit's vacant, no big deal. You've already have that set into the pro forma, very routine. You can turn that unit over between a couple of days and a couple of weeks, especially if it's here in San Diego at minimal cost. But with a commercial property, there are some clients I've advised, you need to have 7 figures set aside at the end of this lease period to deal with a potential vacancy. And they're going to have to go in and do a lot of work with the property, tenant improvements. If that property were to go vacant, they have extended downtime for leasing. It might be a period of months. It might be a year. It's a big event. And so you've got to be certain that a commercial property like that is appropriate for the client. What is the property condition? Are there going to be capital replacements required? Are you going to be getting into significant construction? Do they have that expertise? Do they have the desire and the willingness? Or is that going to be a thorn in their side during retirement when they want to be out traveling? So that's very important. Then the answers to those questions then feed into the market segments. What's the appropriate type of property for them? The last few years, multifamily and industrial properties have been the darlings. But in commercial brokerage, we refer to these as food groups, and different food groups go in and out of favor with different market conditions. Right now you wouldn't want to be anywhere near an office building typically. But on the flip side, there's probably going to be some bargain purchasing opportunities in office properties in the upcoming years. And for people who know how to deal with reworking office buildings, there could be good opportunities there. Next slide, please. So then we get into investigating the geography, and I alluded to that in my opening remarks. what's appropriate for the client. There's an old adage in the business about you want to invest where you can see the chimney from your front yard. It's always easier to deal with any potential problems when you're at home and you don't have to factor in travel time, travel costs. Timing is a big consideration. We've had a number of speakers come to our estate planning council over the years and talk about the importance of pre-planning the sale of a business. And you begin working years in advance to get, 2-3 years in advance to get the book set up, get your financial statements in order so that when you're showing the 2 prior years of financials to a prospective purchaser, you're putting your best foot forward. Same thing with real estate. So there are times in one of the case studies that I'm going to get into, I actually advise the client to wait and to some distress of hers, she did wait, and we came up for a couple of years and we came out with a more successful outcome. Ownership structures, I think Bill might have touched on this, but when you do an exchange, you need to maintain your vesting from your relinquished property to your replacement property. And then when your client's doing the exchange, are they going to go into their own property, or are they going to take whatever entity they have and roll that into some form of what I'll call a syndicated property, a partnership? There are ways for them to do it. Delaware statutory trusts. There's some other private equity vehicles that are available out there with some syndicators who will take exchange funds and allow you to retain your entity as you roll into the investment. Building the team, believe in using specialists, both as your real estate brokers, but also have a good sense for who your lenders are going to be. You want to be talking with them in advance so that you understand what kind of financing is and is not available. And that is not available. That's been an issue the last few months, and it'll probably be an issue going into next year. Your exchange accommodator, critical. Bill, I like the points you made of pointing out that they're not regulated. You want to be investigating, performing due diligence on the exchange accommodator. They're going to be holding a substantial amount of money for your client. Next slide. Okay, now we get into some of the fun stuff. We have 2 case studies, and the first one has a part 1, which occurred in, I think this was 2006, and part 2 was in the year 2020. So it's a sequence of 2 exchanges over a 14-year period. And some of you have been around San Diego for a long time, might remember the old Seltzer Kaplan Law Complex. They owned a couple of office buildings between 4th and 5th Avenue up in the kind of the Middletown Bankers Hill area. And one of my clients acquired the property from Seltzer Kaplan, and as Seltzer Kaplan moved out into new offices, and he was able to release the space, but he recognized he had a little bit of a tiger by the tail. He leveraged into the deal, did well with it, but Seltzer Kaplan moved out of the property for a reason. It was becoming dated. There were upcoming capital replacements that were going to be significant. Because of that, there were leasing challenges, and it led to irregular cash flow. And so rather than try to go in and rework this aging office building, he decided, okay, I've made some money here. It's time to pass this asset on to someone else and allow them to have a run with it. I'm going to take my money and go elsewhere. So this was a sophisticated investor, high level of risk tolerance. He's open for opportunity. I mean, he's looking for something where it doesn't have to be all clean cut. I can take a little risk and do something a little different if I'm going to get a higher rate of return. And I've been very careful to maintain good brokerage networks in San Diego over the years. And, you know, that allowed me to put feelers out into the brokerage community. And I received a phone call from a commercial broker that I know, and he had a client who had a problem. And of course, if you can go in and solve someone's problems for them, there's usually a payoff. And so we took a look at this and figured out, yeah, okay, we can probably fix this problem. And if we can do that and pick up a higher rate of return, wonderful. So if you go to the next slide. This is a school campus up on the southeast side of Escondido along Bear Valley Parkway. And the Classical Academy is a charter school. They were in escrow to purchase it. They had tied it up in 2005. Now remember, this is the bubble years. Property values were leaping upwards. They had a 1-year escrow. The school went out to the parents, to their clients, and told them, wonderful, we're going to have this new campus for next year. And being very good educators, they do a wonderful job running a school, but they're not real estate investors. And when they put this property into a year-long escrow, they went to their bank and asked, can you finance the transaction? The bank said, oh, yes, we'll finance this for you. Well, when the bank says we'll finance this for you, it meant something other than what the educators heard. The educators didn't realize that a 10% or a 20% down payment, doesn't cut it in the world of commercial real estate. Of course, the bank is thinking they're going to be coming in with 35, 40% cash down. So they have to open for classes in tail end of August, early September. And we're getting into the spring. They're supposed to close the escrow in 75, 90 days. They're down talking with their lender and they're finding out, oh dear, we don't have what it takes to close this deal. The seller, meanwhile, is figuring out, man, I shouldn't have entered into a contract to sell this property a year ago. This thing's gone up. I've got residential land developers approaching me. They want to turn it into a subdivision. I sold this thing short. So the the school did not have an assignment clause in their contract. I mean, they were really stuck. What the investor was able to do was come in, basically loan the school the money to buy the property. So the school completed their purchase. We had the contract set up so that the deed then immediately passed on to my client. He acquired it as a replacement property, leased it back to the school, a triple net lease at a high cap rate to compensate him for stepping in, solving their problem. And he was able to acquire an investment, providing the stable cash flow. That lasted for about 14 years until the school got to the point where we really want to own our own campus. We don't want to be tenants. We know we're paying a lot of rent for this property. And so the school finally approached them and told them, if you don't sell the school to us, we have another property we're looking at, we're going to move. And the school had since developed a couple of other school campuses. So we knew at that point they had the capability to do that. They had become much more sophisticated in their real estate dealings. So that then led to the next exchange. Next slide. We controlled the timing on the sale of the school. So client agreed to sell the school to them, but we want to be able to extend the closing while we search for a replacement property. This was during the pandemic. Our approximately September of 2020. You remember a lot of investors stepped back from the market, both securities markets and the real estate market. There were not many people looking for $10 million investment properties at that time. So we had a bit of a void in the market. A group had come in, acquired the old handyman building down in Southwest Chula Vista, done a multi-million-dollar renovation, entered into a long-term lease with a trade school. The trade schools have been doing very well. And they were looking for a buyer for the property, and we were one of the few buyers in the market at that time. So it allowed my client to replace the cash flow that they had up in Escondido and move into another high cap rate, stable investment for them. That property has a 10-year lease on it. Now, what happens when that lease comes up? Tenant might renew, or you might be left with a very large vacancy. The property sits on, I believe it's 3 acres of land zoned for multifamily development. And if you know what's happening on the west side of Chula Vista with the redevelopment of the waterfront and gentrification occurring in the old neighborhoods, they're very well positioned for 10 years out. They've got another option for them. Okay, case study number 2. You flip, there we go. Okay, this was a fun one. I love making these phone calls. It's about 1999. And I pick up the phone. I'm sure it was a landline. And I call my client. Hey, Joe, what are you doing this morning? Let me guess, Robert. I'm buying more real estate. What do you have? I said, okay, here's what we got. I've got a collection of old commercial buildings. These things are awful. Total bulldozer bait. But wait, there's more. The tenants are total flakes. It's going to be a pain in the ass to get the rent out of them every month. Forget about trying to renovate these buildings. They're past that, functionally obsolete. I mean, they just need to be bulldozed. But it's at the corner of 30th and Upas in North Park. And we had been investing in North Park for a while, anticipating gentrification up there. It sits on 35,000 square feet of land. You're going to get in on a low basis on the land. You're basically, effectively paying land price for this. And the owner will carry back the first trust deed at 6% interest with a 25% down payment. Now, interest rates were a lot higher back then, so 6% was a deal. And the property selling at a 10% cap rate. So you have a 400 basis point spread between the cap rate and the interest rate. So this thing's going to cash flow really well if you can deal with all these problems that you're buying your way into. Well, for this particular client, sophisticated, had some big background in property renovation, some background in development. He could work with that. Jumped on it. We got the property under contract same day, paid full price. I was talking with the listing broker a couple of days later, and he's like, "Oh, Robert, we shouldn't enter into that contract with you." Why not? I mean, we're reputable. This guy's going to perform. He goes, "We've gotten 3 more offers. We jumped too fast. We undersold the property." So that property did deteriorate. He had a hard time with it. And John knows the neighbor. He knows what it became of it. Flip to the next picture. We could have leased this out to a film studio to film the next episode of Breaking Bad or in the next Mad Max movie, the post-apocalyptic movie. Not only did the property deteriorate, but the property, there was a transfer, and no longer was it a sophisticated party who knew how to deal with something like this in the ownership seat. It became his former wife in the ownership seat. And she contacted me during the Great Recession. Robert, man, this is bad. Why did my ex-husband ever buy this thing? Why did you sell this to him? But I told her, don't sell right now. I said, this is not the time. You're going to have to sell at a discount. This is a very attractive property in an active market. Go ahead, put the rolls of Visqueen up on the roof and just milk it. Just milk it. Let it run into the ground. Just milk this thing. And about 18 months later, I sensed the market was turning. We took it out to the market. We had a bidding war with 6 different developers, including CityMark, the H.G. Fenton Company, Lloyd Russell, well-known urban infill developer, Jonathan Siegel, all bidding the price upwards on this property. On best and final round, Jonathan Siegel came in and convinced us he really, really, really wanted this property, and entered into a contract with him. We kept control of the closing date. Remember what that does for you. It avoids jumping into that 45-day time frame where you're rushed, you're panicked to find the replacement property. So it gave us time to go out into the marketplace and find a suitable replacement property for someone who's not a full-time real estate investor, developer, renovator. Brandon, if you flip to the next slide, incidentally, this is what Jonathan Siegel did with the property. This is the North Parker. I believe it's 29 apartment units over commercial, including Underbelly, which is a fun Asian fusion restaurant. The back of the property also had Club Johnny, which held Jonathan's classic car collection. But getting onto the replacement property, Brandon, next slide. Conventional apartments up in a good part of the mid-city with good appreciation potential, gentrification potential. These apartments provide a steady cash flow. The owner was able to plug in professional management. I mean, professional management would not have taken on the relinquished property. What management company wants to get into a headache like that? But with good apartments, you can get good quality property management that really runs the property for the client. It's had excellent quality of construction, unit mix, parking ratio. As I said, gentrifying location. So you can see the importance of having that match between the property and the client. And a lot of times when people approach me regarding a tax-deferred exchange, they're talking about cap rates. If I go into this, I can get this cap rate. If I go into this, I can get this cap rate. And I'm always trying to tell them, cap rate's important, but cap rate comes last. Once we figure out what the appropriate investment is for you, the right kind of property in the right location where we're going to have opportunities, we can't be looking for a needle in a haystack during a tax-deferred exchange. You have to shop where the market is, because even though we can extend the closing period on the relinquished properties, we do have to have a very, very high degree of probability that we're going to be able to find the replacement property within 90, 120 days. So we don't want to set the bar so high on the replacement property that we're not likely to be able to find something out there in the marketplace. So really, the client counseling, setting the expectations. What's realistic? What are we really going to be able to find out there? And then also asking the question, is this worth doing? When we really have to come down to brass tacks, what are we going to find for the replacement property? Is it a good enough move from where you are, from the property you have right now, to be worth going through the transaction costs and the risks that are involved in a tax deferred exchange. And the risks can be mitigated, but there are some risks there. So we've got to be careful about that, be certain that we have the planning in place. We have a good game plan with a high probability for success. And that's when we'll move ahead with the tax deferred exchange. Okay, question time. And real quick promo, if any of your clients have $12 million in their pocket, burning a hole through, and they would like to acquire one of the very few oceanfront, literally beachfront apartment complexes in San Diego. I'm going to have one coming on the market beginning of the year. So let me know, little advanced promotion there. But let's see if questions about tax deferred exchanges. Yes.
That's appropriate, but can you use your traditional IRA funds to work through that so you don't pay taxes on RMDs?
In terms of acquiring a replacement property in advance, or how would you use the? What are you thinking of doing? What's the motive? What would like to do? I have found trustees who will work with that. Trying to think who he is. I have some IRA funds invested. I'm general partner of some LLCs, and I do have some IRA funds, and we are. If you give me a call afterwards, I'll tell you who we're using as an intermediary. RJ can answer that. Ryan. You know, I'm going to be doing that until my dying day. So Glenn Arnold, who works with me at Voight, when I was a young single guy in the 1980s, his brother Brian was my roommate. Glenn, I'm sorry.
I just don't know the answer to that. I'm always curious because it's something a lot of people are talking about in this case. There's been enough of a track record if we've been through all of the hurdles that other investments like TICs had to go through to really know at the end of the day, this is a good place to exchange into.
Yeah.
That's my question for any financial advisors, guys.
So most of my clients are, professional property investors, so they've not used them. But I think, RJ, can you answer that question?
So the hot parts of the market right now are in the DST market, are in the senior housing. How many people understand why senior housing is a growing, expanding area? Typically right now, those are looking at, depending on whether they're using leverage on them or not, they're single units, typically 25 to 32 million. So again, with DSTs, you can't be using like an apartment fund where you've got assets coming in and out. You have to have a single asset you're owning for the period of time. And so we're seeing those typically turn they're paying generally right about 5.5%, 5.75% double tax free because of depreciation. They may have a pro rata share of the interest income or interest deduction. And selling right now, because it's in the senior space, that one's very attractive. There's also, believe it or not, mobile home parks can work for that area because you're in your single unit. You're not moving things out. So private placements won't work for 1031 exchanges. It has to be a single asset, but you're owning for, again, 4 to 7 years is what we're working with, but we're an independent RIA. So we have access to shorter term projects. So Glenn, I'm not sure if that's helpful or not, but you're right. This is a burgeoning part of the real estate market. So we'll see more of these coming in, being able to continue to flip. And they, of course, will qualify for 1031 exchanges when they come up as well, or do a partial 1031. Hope that helps.
Can I just add that the PFT is just a legal vehicle. How they do depends on what the investments are, what fees you pay, who the manager is, and they tell you when they're going to exit. But the DST is like, it's just a legal entity. So it depends on, it depends on what you invest in. Like RJ said, what is it put into, that will determine how it's performed.
Okay, any more questions? All right, I'm going to pass it off to Bill.
Robert, Bill, thank you so very much. I think you've really demonstrated the ultimate expert in 1031 with a whirlwind tour of the code section and the issues behind court cases and such, and Bill Exeter. And obviously you're seeing combined with, the real estate expert. We certainly all have real estate clients that own real estate, but this is all that Robert does every day. So there's much to be benefited from working with the two of them. Their CPA or tax professional certainly is a fit within this. Lenders, obviously, if that's an issue that's going on in the planning. And of course, the key behind all of it is it's all revolving around the planning. So happy to help. These are great guys here. Our next meeting is January 2nd with Jenny Bratt of Shepherd Mullen. She moved recently from Withersburgman and is a noted expert in the estate planning world, ACTAC fellow. So we look forward to seeing you then.